This year we celebrate our 40th anniversary, the Silver Jubilee, meaning that in 1975, by the Georgetown Agreement, we were established, and establishing it in the Georgetown, which is the capital city of Guyana, my home country, it followed shortly after the Lomé, the first Lomé Agreement, which followed Yaoundé. But Lomé had a wider scope of participation. And sometimes many countries in Europe think that Yaoundé was only with those countries that were former colonies. No, not at all. Ethiopia was part of Yaoundé, and it was an effort to look at how Europe will make a commitment to the question of enhancing the trade between developing countries and developed world. And that is why in the partnership of Lomé that was signed in 1975, we followed up with a number of foreign ministers in the shadow or closely to the non-aligned movement at that time, thinking that on the basis of negotiating with Europe, our strength and solidarity will be very important. What were we concerned about negotiating? We were concerned at that time to bring together the English-speaking countries and also the established Francophone countries that had been part of Yaoundé in the trade relations, because the UK was about to enter. The UK had entered Europe.
Yeah.
And therefore, particularly our sugar, the Commonwealth Sugar Agreement, with its preferences, we needed to see those maintained. But we wanted to know that the trade with Europe would be sufficiently predictable over a period of time to allow trade to be an instrument for our development. Along with that came the contribution that is in the EDF that Bernadette was referring to, that had several billions now. The European Development Fund is a very unique instrument. It is the only of its kind between developed countries, Europe, and the 79 member states of the ACP, which is co-managed. And it has three levels in which it is dispersed and planned and committed. First, there is what we call a National Indicative Program, the NIPs, that go to individual member states. And then there's a Regional Indicative Program, which groups our 6 regions, 4 from Africa, and the Caribbean and Pacific are treated as one region. The Caribbean, which is basically now what was formerly the CARICOM community, but it now includes CARIFORUM, which is the largest segment that has Dominican Republic, and of course Haiti and Suriname are part, and then the Pacific 14 islands. So we have then at another level, other than the regional programs, we have what is called the intra-ACP, the intra-ACP EDF. That is going to be roughly 2.8 billion this year in the financial framework that runs from 2014 to 2020. So overall, it's roughly 30 billion. The 30 billion will be for the national level, the regional level, and then the intra-ACP. We in the ACP Secretariat, working very closely with the European Commission, would co-manage what we do. Now we are in the process of defining a strategy for the 11th EDF. We've had 10 EDFs so far. This is the 11th one that will go from 2014 to 2020. And we have identified 3 main substantive areas in which we will be programming the resources of the 11th EDF, and this will help to answer Bernadette's question of how does it reach to the member states. The areas are going to be health and human development. That will be a thematic area. And in that area, we in the ACP will be very keen in looking at enhancing the health systems of member states in the ACP, but especially those that have been affected by the Ebola. And while we can see some recovery, while we've seen also the prevention and zero Ebola in Nigeria and other countries, we want to take account of the system for health and health care across member states to aim at preventing the outbreak of these major viruses and such devastating consequences. So health and human development is one area in which the 11th EDF will be programming specific activities. The second area has to do with what we call the private sector development. And our focus on private sector development will be for the small and medium enterprises. Europe has a tremendous success in how small and medium enterprise have been able to contribute significantly. More than 75%, it is said, of the GDP in large countries such as Germany comes from small and medium. Of course, the scale will be much more in terms of what you would have as small and medium that we would have in ACP countries. Why that is important? It is important for three reasons. One, the entrepreneurial activity that is encouraged there, and the entrepreneurial activity that is encouraged there focuses a lot on youth and also on women. But the focus on that entrepreneurial activity allows us to see how people can cluster their small and medium enterprises into increasing their scale to make it possible not only to improve their productivity and generate income locally, but to see the possibilities of those small and medium enterprises being scaled up for export. Mm-hmm. Export is important to earn foreign exchange, to buy the industrial material that is necessary for us to do the industrialization. So that second area of small and medium enterprise will be an important one for us to look into in very concrete ways, generating jobs among the youth. We have a demographic problem, which is the contrary to what is many European countries. You have an aging population, we have a young population. Large percentages of our population are 25 years and under, sometimes as many as 50% of the population. How do you create jobs at a time when automation, at a time when industry is utilizing technology that displaces labor? Nor do we want to encourage labor that is unskilled labor, but we want to encourage the way in which we can generate jobs that is meaningful for its productivity. That means looking at technologies that are suitable. The third area that we will look at relates very closely to climate change, the management of our natural resources and the impact of climate change. How do we look at, I like us to correct the word frequently used about natural hazards. They are natural and man-made environmental degradation. Yeah. They are man-made. It's how we are relating to our environment that has to be taken into account. Of course, yes, sea level rise and climate change and the intensity of cyclones and the intensity in which we can see now many environmental quote-unquote disasters taking place. But we as men, human beings, humanity, has played a part in what we're doing with our environment, and therefore I like very much, and you will understand that, the encyclical that Pope Francis has put before the world is saying we have only one home, planet Earth, that we have to take care of together, and we must see how we look at that, with a responsibility, common and differentiated, but related to the capacities and the responsibilities we've had. So that third area will be looking at managing our natural resources, enormous amount of mineral resources, but also our forests, and a new area that we're paying a lot of attention to, our marine and ocean resources. Marine resources are important. Now we are very familiar with the fisheries and the questions of how fisheries management is taking place. And I want to touch a bit on that because a lot of the tuna, more than 70% of the tuna that is consumed or is produced in the world comes from the Pacific, and now the Pacific is therefore a region of great competition with fisheries resources, and the Pacific intends therefore to see the best way in which it can manage those resources, that it doesn't become a depleting resource, but it serves the purpose of sustainable development. Mm-hmm. The fourth area in our intra-ACP is what relates to a contribution agreement to strengthen the institutions of the ACP, which are like the Center for Technical Cooperation in Agriculture, based in Wagenhagen, and used to be the Center for Development of Enterprise.
I have one question about how are you going to handle the immigration, what I call ecologic. I mean, with the climate change, do you have some projects with that, or how it will happen?
And maybe if I can, do you have at the moment some cases of problems I heard in the Pacific, that some islands were surrounded or maybe too much surrounded by water. Did you have already some examples of cases of people who had to leave their countries because of their islands?
Well, ecologic problems.
Ecological problems, yes.
Yeah.
Let me come to the migration issue. We believe the migration issue needs to be seen in 2 or 3 different dimensions. First of all, humanity as a species is migrant. We've always moved, and we move. Now, the problem that has arisen because of civil strife or, in fact, turmoil in countries that produces migrants are very different from those that are seeking an opportunity to improve their well-being. But we've had that. It is European migrants who left Europe in the time, the famines, potato, what happened in Ireland, and they went to North America, the settlers who went in search of. We must look, therefore, at a way in which we can not make migration seen initially as some criminal activity, but now that it has become in the grip of criminals, particularly in what is crossing from North Africa into Europe, the criminal networks that are being there have to be dealt with in a very strong security way. But we must look at what are the factors that are pushing young people. What are the factors that are pushing women and their children to be able to seek a better life? What are those factors that are giving rise to persons who now have acquired skills they feel that are required or needed by Europe? Europe has always welcomed migrants in a particular way, but we therefore have to look at it in a more complex way and to see how we address the situations where there is turmoil and civil strife and upheaval, and therefore peace and security in the countries, the rule of law, but also how we are addressing the problems of development in those countries in North Africa that are forcing people. The upheaval of the consequence of what is called the Arab Spring and the whole upheaval of Libya, what is taking place in Egypt. Northern Africa and the Middle East has become chaotic and in turmoil. So dealing with that question of asylum seeking, we have in fact a joint migration and development program that we work with Europe on, looking at the push factors, looking at how you can be addressing jobs, looking at how you can be addressing the concerns of those persons who want to move, but also how we can see what you've touched upon, the economic or ecological refugees who will come about because of countries being dislocated. That is tied into climate change. That is tied into how we begin to address the environment. And it is, of course, that there are islands is an existential threat, this question of climate. What is happening to the small islands in the Pacific and elsewhere? The sea level rising can mean the disappearance of the city. So we have to be taking steps very vigorously to look at how we are asking, therefore, the developed countries to reduce the greenhouse gas, to reduce the levels of pollution. But all must contribute to that. And we hope that the COP21 will common but differentiated responsibilities in relation to your capacity. All must come on board and contribute. We cannot have the Earth's surface warming beyond 2 degrees. In fact, we think it should be 1.5. Therefore, measures have to be taken and adopted. What technologies, the fossil fuels, how we reduce that, how we have an entire carbon-free economy, how we look at ways and means by which people are, in fact, abusing the technology that produces, and therefore there is the human dimension of our human behavior, of waste, of how we dispose of waste, and therefore there is a way of thinking about taking care of this one home that we have in common, again to repeat what Pope Francis says, of all common humanity, our one home together. So questions of climate, civil strife, peace and security, we're working on those under migration and development, understanding the rights of migrants, understanding how you can have legal migration and to provide access to, but also to see where their skills are needed, and people who come should attempt to become assimilated into the culture. You must learn the language of the home country. You should encourage that, and facilities must be made. And you have had that experience of the Turkish population in Germany, what happened after the war. You have an aging population in Europe. How do we look at ways by which we can manage or regulate it in a humane way to see the possibilities at different levels? But where there's a criminal aspect, you have to deal with the criminality. But to militarize it and to say you'll be going and setting up in the Mediterranean now a navy that goes after, I don't think so. Even Europe itself is beginning to re-question that. So I think the migration issue has to be dealt with from its poverty, development that is sustainable, creative jobs for young people to attract. Women must see themselves and their livelihood as a possibility in their home country, but also the opportunities for those who are able to give their skills and their talent, and therefore the encouragement of circular migration. You know, many people who are migrants still dream of returning home, and they see that as something temporary, and therefore we should facilitate the conditions by which that contribution can be beneficial for both the sending countries and the receiving countries.